I'm Mark Golub, and in the news, the response to the joint White House press conference of President Donald Trump and Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. And there have been all kinds of reaction and descriptions of this first public appearance of the two leaders together. Surprising, warm, mystifying, affirming, confusing. The two men seem to like each other, though Mr. Netanyahu and Mr. Obama said nice things about each other in public, although they seem to have a very strained, contentious relationship. But Donald Trump's tone is certainly very different than that of his predecessor. Even when the president admonished the prime minister, it was done in a very soft tone. So, for example, here's the president gently telling Mr. Netanyahu to stop settlement construction, and the prime minister doesn't say yes.
So I'd like to see you hold back on settlements for a little bit. We'll work something out, but I would like to see a deal be made. I think a deal will be made. I know that every president would like to. Most of them have not started till late because they never thought it was possible. And it wasn't possible because they didn't do it. But Bibi and I have known each other a long time. A smart man, great negotiator. And I think we're going to make a deal. It might be a bigger and better deal than people in this room even understand. That's a possibility. So let's see what we do.
Let's try it.
Doesn't sound too optimistic, but that's he's a good negotiator.
That's the art of the deal.
I also want to thank...
It's the art of the deal. And there was another moment, probably the most surprising and mystifying of the entire press conference, when Donald Trump began talking about a one-state solution as a viable alternative to a two-state solution. If, he said, both the Israelis and the Palestinians prefer that to the two-state solution. And note Prime Minister Netanyahu's response.
So I'm looking at two-state and one-state, and I like the one that both parties like. I'm very happy with the one that both parties like. I can live with either one. I thought for a while the two-state looked like it may be the easier of the two. But honestly, if Bibi and if the Palestinians, if Israel and the Palestinians are happy, I'm happy with the one they like the best.
Mr. Netanyahu's laugh seemed to many to be forced and a bit uncomfortable. Of course, President Trump has taken a step back on the issue of moving the U.S. Embassy to Jerusalem.
As far as the embassy moving to Jerusalem, I'd love to see that happen. We're looking at it very, very strongly. We're looking at it with great care, believe me. And we'll see what happens, okay?
We'll see what happens. Well, for those who are fervent supporters of the State of Israel, what should be made of this first joint press conference of Donald Trump and Benjamin Netanyahu? And has he disappointed those in the Jewish community who believe that his son-in-law, Jared Kushner, and the president's choice for America's ambassador to Israel, David Friedman, would influence Donald Trump's pro-Israel policies in a stronger fashion? Well, for some insight and analysis, I'm so pleased to welcome back to JBS one of America's leading conservative thinkers, Herb London, past president of the Hudson Institute, a leading American academic who writes on political and social issues challenging America. And Herb has an intimate knowledge of and a love for the State of Israel. He's also the founding president of the London Center for Policy Research, and he's the author of the forthcoming book soon to be released entitled Leading from Behind, the Obama Doctrine and U.S. Retreat from International Affairs. And Herb, thank you so much for joining us.
Well, Mark, look, it's a great pleasure to be with you. You've asked three questions during the course of your introduction. Each one of them, I think, deserve a response, if I may do so.
Yeah, but hold on 1 second. I want to hear you respond to all three. But before we talk about Trump and Netanyahu, I'm so interested. Herb, why did you decide to come out now with a book on the Obama doctrine now that Obama has left office?
Well, one, I want people to understand how this doctrine was different from other foreign policy positions taken by previous presidents. And number two, implicit in the Obama doctrine is the course ahead. That is, what is the passage to the future? How do we deal with the problems that arose during the course of the last 8 years? The world is in disarray. We have to think through what are the probable policy options for the next president. One of the reasons why I believe it's so important for people like Donald Trump to read this book is largely because he has to repair so much of the damage that was done, including restoring the confidence among Sunni nations that do not believe the United States is a firm ally. I've spent time with President Sisi of Egypt, and invariably he says to me, I love America. He studied in America. He went to Carlisle, and he says, but America doesn't love me. What does he mean by that? He means that the United States has not provided all of the military equipment that has been promised for him to fight the war in the Sinai against al-Qaeda and ISIS. And so, again, what you have are nations across the globe looking at the United States for leadership, a leadership we have not provided. Over the last 8 years, what we've seen is nothing but withdrawal. American foreign policy is neither foreign nor policy. It does not involve the kind of leadership that America has provided in the past. So I think this provides some sort of understanding, a pathway for Donald Trump and his administration.
Okay, I understand. By the way, you were quite critical of Donald Trump's candidacy during the primary season, the primary elections, and you urged conservatives to vote for Ted Cruz, who you described as a true conservative, while you called Donald Trump the extension of a reality show and not a conservative. Now that Mr. Trump is president, how do you feel about him, and what do you hope comes out of his administration?
Well, look, you're absolutely right in your assertion about my beliefs about Donald Trump. However, I think that Donald Trump is the president of the United States. He was elected fairly, and I also think probably the only Republican that could have won this race. I also believe that the Donald Trump who is president has asserted himself in a manner that I could not have predicted. I think that the cabinet, by and large, that he's assembled is very, very good, probably as distinguished as any cabinet over the last 5 presidencies. I also think that his instincts, his apparent instincts, appear to be very sound. So, on the whole, I'm sanguine about the future. A lot more sanguine than was the case during the campaign season, when I thought that Trump was bombastic and somewhat intellectually challenged.
You are, at the moment, more optimistic, correct?
That is correct, absolutely.
Okay. All right, Herb. So we look at the press conference, and you saw that President Trump told the Prime Minister he'd like to see him hold back on settlements for a little bit. It implied his doing so would facilitate the peace process. While the tone is obviously different, I'm asking you, how different is Trump's position substantively from that of President Obama, who always argued that settlements were the major obstacle to a two-state solution?
Look, first of all, you've had the same sort of commentary from Bush. You had the same commentary even from Reagan, who talked about the settlements. People do not understand there must be organic growth in Israel. It's a small country. It is only a tiny portion of the West Bank that the Israelis have used for their own settlements, a tiny portion. And this is disputed territory. It was formerly Jordan, a territory that Israelis managed to occupy after the war in 1967. The idea that somehow this is Palestinian territory that cannot be occupied is part of the proposition that emerged in the Security Council when the United States abstained, but more importantly, was even responsible for orchestrating the language that was used by the sponsors of an attack on Israel. And it was an attack on Israel because what they were suggesting is that the lands obtained since 67 are illegitimate. They are illegal, including the Jewish quarter in the Old City. I mean, it is absurd, absolutely absurd. Yes. If you accept that proposition, then you accept the suicide pact to Israel. I do not accept it. It is different, very, very different from the position that was taken by Obama. Trump has not come out in favor of what has occurred in the Security Council. So this is an important point and a point of departure from what Obama had suggested.
Okay, but you and I see this, I think, in this area very similarly. And I say this to myself, and then I want to hear how you differ. I say to myself, if Trump understands that the land on the east side of the Green Line, including, as you point out, East Jerusalem, the Western Wall, let alone Ma'ale Adumim and the Etzion Bloc, even put aside the issues of further into the West Bank, Ariel and Hebron. Okay, but if he understands that all of the settlement growth, and by the way, they're just communities. You and I know that, Herb. If the communities on the east side of the Green Line are not on Palestinian land, does he believe, do you believe, that if Israel doesn't build, there'll be peace with the Palestinians?
Oh, look, I mean, that is an absurd proposition.
So
Peace
why
with
does
the
it matter?
Palestinians is possible, only possible, when one, there's a recognition of the state of Israel.
Right.
Which, of course, does not exist in any Hamas doctrine and certainly doesn't exist with Fatah. The difference between Fatah and Hamas is Fatah will kill you in a couple of weeks. Hamas wants to kill you immediately. Look, this is absurd. It is absurd to think there is a two-state solution at this time. The two-state solution idea is dead. I don't care what Trump says. It's dead. There is no possibility of a two-state solution. And as far as the one-state solution is concerned, is Israel going to be in the position of being able to absorb these territories? Again, after the Oslo Accords, what you have is the government in the major cities in the West Bank, like Ramallah, are run by the Arabs. They're run by the Israeli government. I mean, the Israeli government doesn't even step into Ramallah. So, part of the difficulty that I have with some of the commentary by Trump really doesn't make any sense. And either the first proposition where he talks about a two-state solution, or the second proposition where he talks about a one-state solution. What you need at the moment, if I were to engage in policy discussion here, and a serious policy discussion, I would talk about patience. One word, patience. Because this is not going to happen in my lifetime. You're not going to see resolution of this matter as long as people want to kill you. If tomorrow the Israelis were to give up all of their weapons, there would be no Israel. You'd have one state, and that state would be from the Jordan River to the Mediterranean Sea. There'd be no Israel. If the Arabs would give up all of their, there would be peace immediately. So it is a question of who wants to kill whom, and whether, in fact, the Israelis can defend themselves. This business about a two-state or one state is less significant than what the Palestinians really want. If you had a referendum tomorrow and you said to the Palestinians, what do you want? The answer is very obvious, entry into Israel so they can get jobs.
But
keep in mind, Mahmoud Abbas, who was elected for a 4-year term, is there for his 12th year. He doesn't represent anyone in the area. If election were to occur tomorrow, Hamas would probably win. You'd have another terrorist state on the border of Israel. So what are we talking about? I mean, let's be honest. Let's be truthful about what has happened in this area, and let the Trump administration come to grips with what is the reality.
Okay, and that's really the insight I'm looking for from you. The most mystifying part of that press conference came when, as you point out, President Trump said he was open to a two-state solution or a one-state solution. You point out both are ridiculous. By the way, what he said, Herb, was whichever option the two parties, Israel and the Palestinians, prefer, he'd go along with. Herb, given the fact that any Palestinian support of a one-state solution is based on the Palestinian design to eliminate the Jewish state of Israel altogether, where in the world do you think this embrace of a one-state solution by Donald Trump came from? Is it David Friedman? Is it Jared Kushner? And those who want a one-state solution by Israel's annexing the West Bank. Where did Trump get that idea, do you think?
I think that comes from his very vivid imagination. I don't think that it's a matter that was checked with anyone. I think it was just a question of a kind of rhetorical stream of consciousness. I do not believe that he really thought this through, nor did he sit down with advisors on the Middle East and say, what do you think about either of these propositions? As I said, it's a kind of foolish notion. Neither idea makes any sense. And when you think about it, what does a state mean? A state requires a certain infrastructure. It requires a constitution, requires a parliament. It requires a people who are capable of obtaining foreign direct investments. None of that exists in the Palestinian territory. It is an extortion racket in the Palestinian territory, and there is no doubt that when you see these large, very, very elaborate homes in the West Bank owned by Arabs, this is foreign money that has come into this area. These are the Arabs that are providing support for the leadership in this community, and they do not represent the Palestinians. By and large, the Palestinian people have been abused by other Arabs, not by Israel, but by other Arabs. And so if you wanted to have a true environment where there was some sort of economic development of the kind that Paris always talked about, there is a way to do that, and that is to allow the Palestinians to live in peace, allow the Palestinians to have their own government, create an infrastructure for a real government, and give the Palestinians the opportunity to enter Israel with the understanding that they would do so only on peaceful terms, terms that could be secured.
Well, I think you say it perfectly, but you know, you're very interesting. I want you to see the arc just in this conversation with me. On the one hand, we acknowledge that during the primaries you were against Trump. Then, now that he's president, you said, well, now you're sort of optimistic about Trump. Then I say to you, Herb, where does he get this idea that Israel would ever want a one-state solution? You say to me, there was a stream of consciousness at the moment. Nobody in the administration ever talked this through with him. Nobody thought about it. And Herb, I want you to know, on JBS, I have been adamant that no criticism of Donald Trump should be ad hominem, and that most of the mainstream media's just murdering the guy was not fair at all. That doesn't mean I support him. It doesn't mean that I'm blind and dumb. And so when you say to me, it just came out of his mind, he's not talked to any policy advisors, it's not David Friedman, it's not Jared Kushner. If you're telling me the President of the United States gets up with the Prime Minister of Israel and just talks off the top of his head, Herb, I've seen your background. Your resume is so impressive. How does someone like you not say to me, that was one of the most frightening things I've ever seen?
Well, look, at the end of it, I mean, look, I agree with every word that you've just uttered. But the one thing that I would say, there was one qualification, and that's a little different from what other people have said. If the two parties want this, I'll accept it. There are no two parties that want this. I mean, it's a non-starter. It's like saying, I want two parties to win the World Series. Well, only one wins the World Series. It's an absurd comment by Trump. I'm perfectly willing to give him the benefit of the doubt because I realize that neither of those propositions is the slightest regard for reality.
Okay, so you and I wish, tell me if I'm right, you and I wish that Jared Kushner and David Friedman and anybody else in the Jewish world who has a sensitivity to the complexity of this problem and understands it's not about settlements, it's not about anything, it's not about not about right of return, it's not about Jerusalem. Those are all commentary that can be worked out in negotiation. The ultimate issue is you've got one people who are bent on destroying the other. And by the way, it may even be individual Palestinians who are happy to live and work in Israel. I don't doubt it. But it's clear that, as you said, you've got Abbas, who is not a democratically now operating president. You've got Hamas, a totally different organization. You've got a Hamas charter and a PLO charter that still calls for the destruction of Israel. You can't have this, you can't have any kind of solution. Two-state, as you say, two-state, one-state, no state. You can't have it until the Palestinians renounce terrorism, renounce incitement, and change their attitude about the legitimacy of the state of Israel. What I want is Jared Kushner and David Friedman to take Donald Trump into a room and not let him out until he understands what is so patently clear. But Herb, you've been doing this a long time. Not one American administration has seen it as you have. And as you pointed out, and I've read this in other other analysts who write on, for example, in the Hudson Institute website, you have America perpetuating the big lie that the West Bank is Palestinian territory. America uses that language, even as you say, there's no justification to it. I want to know, will Donald Trump be told by somebody, you've got to see the situation for what it is, and he'll come out the next time and stand next to the Israeli prime minister and not talk gibberish? What's the possibility of that happening, Herb?
Look, I think that there were probably people who, after that comment about the one and two state solution, probably said, Mr. President, it's time we had a conversation. I don't know if it's Jared Kushner. I don't know if it's Mr. Friedman. I don't know either of those personalities. All I can tell you is that was an absurd part of the commentary that was engaged in yesterday. My feeling about it is I'm perfectly willing to give Trump the benefit of the doubt, for several reasons, by the way. One, he treated Netanyahu as an important statesman, greeted him at the front door. He didn't have to enter through the back door. He wasn't asked to leave where the garbage is normally thrown out of the White House. Very important. It's a symbolic gesture. Two, he said, I'm going to give serious consideration to the idea of moving the embassy. You're not moving the embassy, by the way. This is a kind of silly notion. Just change the word from consulate to embassy and exactly where it is. Keep it in exactly the same spot. You're not moving any buildings. Nothing is happening. You're changing one word on a plaque, and that word goes from consulate to embassy.
Yes.
It's symbolic, very important. I think that Trump will do that. And I don't know if it's Friedman that's urging him to do it or who in the administration is urging him to do it, but he will do that. And that strikes me as an important step. It's an important step because it offsets the damage that was done in the Security Council that I made reference to before. And third thing that I would say about this is that if we're talking about what is happening in that part of the world now, unless there is some willingness to consider a clear, unequivocal recognition of Israel as the Jewish state, there is no discussion that really is sensible. There's nothing that makes any sense. You have to start with the proposition, this is a Jewish state, we understand it and recognize it. And interestingly, in large part because the United States government under Obama abandoned Israel, Israel now has allies in the Sunni world who are perfectly willing to engage in that gesture. If you would have said to me, Mark, 10 years ago, 5 years ago, that the Saudi government is going to send a military delegation to Jerusalem to discuss joint military maneuvers between the Saudi army and Israel, I'd say you're smoking hallucinogens.
Absolutely.
But it happened.
Yes.
It happened. And I've said I've spoken to Sisi several times. The military-to-military ties between Egypt and Israel today are closer than they've ever been. Israel crosses that border unannounced to the rest of the world, but with the permission of the Egyptians, and is helping to fight the war in the Sinai. Now, again, this is not something that receives the attention of the New York Times.
Correct.
But Egypt and Israel are working very closely together. So if you were to say to Sisi, what do you think about the movement of the embassy? Because he would probably say, come on, there are a lot of important issues. This is not one of them.
All right. By the way,
so there are things that are happening, and this kind of Sunni-Israeli alliance is now starting to emerge under the guidance of Donald Trump's team. And I'm very much aware of that.
good for you.
So I can tell you that these informal bilateral discussions with Saudi Arabia, with Egypt, with Jordan, with Bahrain, with the United Arab Emirates, that's occurring now. And that is, I think, very helpful. Israel is not going to be a member of this defense condominium, but it will be an unregistered member of the defense condominium.
I think you said very well. And although I have serious issues with style, and I worry about certain things that are evident about our president, at the same time, I believe that the characterization of him as some kind of Hitlerian authoritarian individual is just nonsense, and that in his way, he wants good for America and he wants good for Israel, and I am hopeful as well. I want to ask you about one more thing that came out of the press conference. How did you feel about his answer to the question regarding whether his candidacy and his administration have created a social climate that tolerates anti-Semitism in America? And I want to play the clip. It's very, very brief, Herb. And then I want you to comment on his answer. Here's that question and answer.
Mr. President, since your election campaign and even after your victory, we've seen a sharp rise in anti-Semitic incident across the United States. And I wonder, what do you say to those among the Jewish community in the States and in Israel, and maybe around the world, who believe and feel that your administration is playing with xenophobia and maybe racist tones.
Well, I just want to say that we are, very honored by the victory that we had, 306 electoral college votes. We were not supposed to crack 220. You know that, right? There was no way to 221, but then they said there's no way to 270. And there's tremendous enthusiasm out there. I will say that we are going to have peace in this country. We are going to stop crime in this country. We are going to do everything within our power to stop long simmering racism and every other thing that's going on, because a lot of bad things have been taking place over a long period of time. I think one of the reasons I won the election is we have a very, very divided nation, very divided. And hopefully I'll be able to do something about that. And it was something that was very important to me. As far as people, Jewish people, so many friends, a daughter who happens to be here right now, a son-in-law, and 3 beautiful grandchildren. I think that you're going to see a lot different United States of America over the next 3, 4, or 8 years. I think a lot of good things are happening, and you're going to see a lot of love. You're going to see a lot of love.
In general, how do you see the atmosphere being created by Donald Trump? Does it worry you at all? Do you feel there's been a serious or any uptick of anti-Semitism in America because of Donald Trump?
I do not. Look, there are two, when the alt-right, if I can use that expression, had its conference, there were 254 people that showed up. There were 300 people from the press that came. Mr. Spencer was there. Mr. Gottfried was there. I mean, it was the usual alt-right characters. The fact is, if we're talking about 254 people who are anti-Semitic, is that more or less than we've had over the last 100 years? I mean, there are always anti-Semites in America. This is a country that has embraced Israel and embraced Jews in a way that most countries in the world have not. When you talk about the United States, what are we talking about? 6% of the population is Jewish, and we're talking about a tiny portion of the population that fall into this category. And yet, when you look at all of the polls, 65% support the state of Israel. There have to be a lot of other Americans who are willing to embrace Israel. And if you think about it, there are probably more FBI members in the alt-right than there are alt-right members. So, again, I don't take that too seriously. This is one of the arguments that the New York Times likes to make and others like to make, that Trump is on the right and he's appealing to these kind of strange characters who are anti-Semitic. I don't believe that.
Herb, it has been wonderful speaking to you on the phone. I really look forward. You said you'd come in and sit with me for a L'chaim interview face-to-face. I'm looking forward to it very much. I wish you great success with your new book. And the work you do is wonderful, and I appreciate the analysis, so I hope you let me call you often.
Anytime, Mark. Always a pleasure to be with you. And again, good luck with the station, and good luck with your ideas. I mean, I think that you are one of those great and formidable figures in the Jewish community, and I very much admire you.
You're very sweet. Thank you, Herb. You be well. The thoughts of Herb London, social and political analyst, former president of the Hudson Institute. He's the founding president of the London Center for Policy Institute. He's the author of a book soon to be published entitled Leading from Behind, the Obama Doctrine and U.S. Retreat from International Affairs. And it was just interesting to hear his take. And again, I've heard so many people who are disappointed with the press conference. I understand why. You heard my own reaction. At the same time, as Herb says, there's a different tone. And I am hopeful that that tone will become more and more substantive as we move forward in the relationship, and that ultimately what you'll see is some real a positive stand come out of the United States in a way that we have not seen for a long time vis-a-vis Israel. As always, my thanks to our director, Sloan Copeland, program coordinator, Serge Goldberg, JBS's associate director, Dara Golub, editors, Dennis Golan and John McDevitt, and to the producer of In the News, Carol Lilienthal. Until the next time, I'm Mark Golub. Be well, my friends.